You're listening to TFM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there. Hello and welcome to TFM's local watering hole, where we are in a multiverse of madness, and I am so excited to be bringing from the podcasting universe different podcasters to be able to talk about our movie tonight. Christy could not be here, so I had to assemble a crack team, and I'm so excited back to have with us is Christy's friend Amanda. How are you?
I am fantastic. How are you doing tonight, sir?
I'm doing great. I'm always excited to be able to talk. This is actually going to be our last show of the year, which is kind of crazy, and take a couple weeks off, and then we'll be back. But we are ending on, I would say, a huge high note, because this movie has earned the second highest grossing weekend of all time, which is incredible. And so that meant if I was going to have to replace Christy with somebody, I figured I should probably replace her with at least somebody, one, who has cosplayed as Spider-Man and or looks like an older Spider-Man. And so with us is none other than Aaron Goins.
I don't know. I don't know if I agree with you on those things, but I'll take it.
Well, you have cosplayed as Spider-Man.
Yeah, that's true.
Though.
I have cosplayed.
I sat next to you in a restaurant. You were in a Spider-Man costume.
Yeah, we were eating pizza.
In Atlanta.
It's hard to eat pizza when you don't have you can't get your fingers out of the costume, so you kind of have to use a fork.
Super awkward.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was weird. Seriously though, I mean, there were times here where I felt like you and Tobey Maguire look pretty similar these days, like a cool youth pastor. Yeah,
I will say he's aged well.
He really has
aged well, and I think that he might have hit the gym a little bit before this movie. He looked pretty fit.
I think he did. He was looking great. Yeah. Honestly, everybody in this movie is looking really good. But we're going to be talking, of course, about none other than Spider-Man No Way Home. And before we do that, of course, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. If you're on like Apple or even now Spotify, you can give us a star rating. That is really nice. People can, see, oh, they got a really high star rating. I should probably listen to them. So that would be great. And of course, you can give us a written review on Apple as well. You can also find us on Twitter at the 602 Club. We're on Instagram at the 602 Club TFM. You can find us online at trek.fm, and then we're on Facebook at facebook.com/trekfm. There's a listeners only discussion group you can join called the Babel Conference on Facebook if you want to talk to listeners from all over the world. And of course, if you like the shows here, you can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/trekfm, which we would really appreciate, because we love doing this and we want to keep bringing you the shows, and we can't do it without your help. So again, that's patreon.com/trekfm. So since I have never talked Spider-Man with at least one of you, although Aaron, you and we talked about Into the Spider-Verse a couple years ago when that had come out. And so, but I just kind of wanted to know your history with the character and kind of your thoughts real quickly of just about the previous movies. And so where you were kind of coming into this movie, especially since, I mean, they had kind of spoiled it. They were going to be using a lot of elements from those. So Amanda, what was your original Spider Bite like?
My original Spider Bite was actually the first Spider-Man with Tobey Maguire. So I followed all of those. I transitioned into the Andrew Garfield ones, and I actually liked those ones a little bit better. And I then, this past year, I was a little late to the game, but I did get to see Into the Spider-Verse with the Miles Morales Spider-Man. I don't have a ton of context as far as the comic book lore goes, because I've never really dove into the expansive world of comics that Marvel does offer. But I have loved everything we've gotten so far. And then we've been blessed with Tom Holland, who has stolen my heart. Is it okay to say that? Am I too old to say that about him? Is that weird? Did I make it weird?
I don't think that he's probably that much younger than you are, because he's playing a young version of the character, but Tom Holland's not young anymore, so...
He's adorable, and I have been so excited watching all of the films that he's been in the MCU. So I've been pretty steadfast with my at least on-screen Spider-Man fandom. So
nice. And he's 25 now, so I think it's fine. Yeah,
6 years.
Yeah, I'm sure it's fine. Yeah. So, what about you, Aaron? Where are you kind of coming from with all of the previous Spider-Man movies? And I don't know if I've even asked you this, if you were like a Spider-Man comic person either.
Yeah, I don't think we've talked about this. I feel like I always remember Spider-Man being a thing, like as far back as I can remember when I was a kid. I did watch the animated series that came out in 1994, so that's dating me a bit. I was already a teenager at that point. And then the first movies came out soon after I think that show stopped, with Tobey Maguire. So I do remember like when they first cast Tobey Maguire as Spider-Man, I was like, I don't know. I don't know if he really fits what I've always thought of Spider-Man. And I wasn't thrilled with the casting, but I did enjoy the movies. And I don't know if you guys remember, but at that time, like those movies were just huge, like the biggest superhero movies of the time. And so, like, good on Tobey Maguire for kind of starting the, bringing Spider-Man back, I guess, in a certain way, and definitely bringing him to the theater level, where he became just like a household name. I liked the first two of those movies. I thought the third one was kind of eh. And then when Andrew Garfield was cast as Spider-Man, that was, to me, I thought a better casting choice. I really liked Andrew Garfield as Spider-Man. He was kind of more what I imagined Spider-Man to be like. Really liked his movies, and was really sad that they only made two of them. And then of course, like Amanda said, Tom Holland, you can't not like him. So he's also been a great Spider-Man. And I like that all three of them are very different versions of Spider-Man. And then probably up until this point, my favorite Spider-Man movie was probably Into the Spider-Verse, which was the animated film, which I really, really thought they just knocked that one out of the park. So they set the bar pretty high with Into the Spider-Verse, but we'll talk about, kind of this one and where it ranks for me.
Kind of the same thing with you. I didn't watch the animated series, but I did, of course, watch all the Tobey Maguire movies. I need to go back and rewatch them. I have rewatched the second one in the last few years, and it still really held up. I didn't really love the first one, but that's because I just didn't really like the Power Ranger villain that we got in Green Goblin, the look. And then, like you said, the third movie is kind of a disaster. And then the same with both of you. Like, I thought Andrew Garfield was fantastic. I really enjoyed his movies for the most part. Christy and I actually covered those here this year, and it was fun to go back and look at those again. And the second movie isn't as good as the first movie, but I still would have loved a third. I felt like he deserved it. And it would have been really nice. And then Into the Spider-Verse, Aaron, you and I talked about, like, I saw the trailer for that, and it looked like, to me, it was going to be terrible, and then it was just brilliant. Like, sometimes a trailer can undersell a movie, and that was just hands down, in all honesty, it's probably one of the best comic book movies ever made. It just exudes comic bookiness in a way that no other movie does, and mainly that's because it's a moving comic book.
And it won the Oscar that year, didn't it, for animated film?
I think you're right. So yeah, I mean, I was excited then to come into this movie where, in many ways, it kind of felt like they were trying to mimic that in some ways. To basically do a live action version of Into the Spider-Verse, and so. When I was thinking about ways to kind of dive into the story, it really felt like the best way to start was with the main character and Peter's story, because I feel like there's so much to talk about, because this is a movie in many ways for the MCU where we finally get the Spider-Man story, which is what it means to be Spider-Man, and the lesson about responsibility. And they finally gave us a version of that, but the MCU version of that. And instead of losing Uncle Ben, we lose Aunt May. And I thought that this was really important because for me, up to this point, this Spider-Man has been a bit superfluous in the sense that he's felt really weak as a character because none of his stories have been really substantial. Whereas, I felt like Maguire and Garfield both felt like very substantial, serious characters because of the arcs they go through, and this movie finally did that. So what did you guys think of them finally kind of doing that in this movie, and did it work for you to do the lesson, the classic Spider-Man lesson, this way?
I think that a huge part of what we had been missing with Tom Holland was that Spider-Man's story is inherently rooted in trauma. Point blank, there's no getting around that. He grows from his early traumas. So I think getting that Spider-Man origin story in this one, and also the loss of Tony Stark previously, really helped to fill out where he was going to start coming from. And I'm excited to see that growth. I hope we get more films showing what he's found from this place that he's been taken to in this film.
Yeah, up to this point, Tom Holland's version of Spider-Man, I really like him as an actor, and I really like him as Spider-Man. But I didn't love the movies he was in, especially the standalone Spider-Man movies. They were fun, but I actually enjoyed him kind of more in like what he would show up in like the Avengers movies. So it was kind of nice to see Spider-Man be a little bit more Spider-Man. Like in the previous movies, he kind of had that, he's with Tony, he's got the Iron Spider suit. In a lot of ways, it felt like he was wearing like Iron Man type armor. A lot of the stuff that he had been doing up to this point was, it's set in Washington, D.C. or set in, space or, different places that he's not in that kind of iconic space in New York City, swinging around the city and doing what you would expect Spider-Man to do. So this was kind of the first standalone Spider-Man movie I felt like he actually felt the most like the character. And I was excited to see that. And like you said, they kind of skipped over kind of the origin story of him because it had been told so many times. And it makes sense why Marvel didn't redo that. But it is nice that they kind of did take a movie, even though it was like the third one, to start to actually give him a little bit more, like Amanda said, that trauma, that he now has to deal with, and he's growing as a character. It's not that, he's still a teenager, still in high school, but he's growing up right in front of our eyes as a character, and it's really cool to see.
Yeah, I feel like they've been slowly taking away the pieces that make him kind of like the little golden retriever of the MCU. And now he's going to be more of an adult presence maybe. And I also am super, super thrilled that they did more with Aunt May in this one. They gave her passion and purpose outside of just being the hot aunt. So I was like, the entire thing, she was kind of the hot aunt trope. And then in this one, they gave her a purpose. They gave her heart and soul, and they really made her a full character. And I was very, very excited to see them do that for her.
Yeah, I mean, Aaron, you mentioned something that I do think has been, and honestly, it's been my complaint since the very first Spider-Man movie they've done with Tom Holland, is that he hasn't really been Spider-Man. He's just been Iron Spider, and that's a different type of character, and he's now out of Tony's shadow. He actually feels like Spider-Man now. At the end of the movie when, he's made his own costume and he jumps out the window because he's been, monitoring the police bands. And part of that too is that, like, giving him this really formative lesson to make the character of Peter Parker who he is in the comics. And you both have pointed out the idea of trauma making him who he is. And, in many ways, most comic book characters are born out of some kind of trauma. And this one is so pivotal to who he is. And I think what I loved about that, and you pointed this out too, Amanda, this idea of that May gets to teach him the lesson, not only just about responsibility, but about what it means to do what is right, even when it's hard or it costs you everything, and a lot of that has to do with, too, dealing with the consequences of your choices. And Peter made some kind of bad choices in this movie that led to some horrendous consequences. And one of those is the death of his aunt, as well as having to choose between, do I let the multiverse invade our universe, or do I let everybody forget who I am? And, when you're between a rock and a hard place, I just loved that it was Aunt May's lesson. No, we do what is right no matter what. And it doesn't matter the cost. And we have to deal with the consequences of our choices. And I thought that was so beautiful that it's her that really brings that home, because she's willing to deal with the consequences of her choices, which are also trying to protect Peter. And so I thought it all dovetailed really nicely, and I was really surprised to see just how well that part of the movie really worked. And I have to say, too, I think the second half of the movie is more successful than the first half, because the first half feels like the things I didn't really love about the MCU version of Spider-Man. And the second half of the movie, it finally starts to take itself seriously and the character seriously. And once we do that, I think we put Peter on a trajectory to which I'm actually interested to really dive into now. And like you said, I'm on the edge of my seat waiting for the next Spider-Man movie, whereas before that was totally not the case. I was like, oh, another Spider-Man movie. This one makes that interesting now to actually do that. So, and part of that is just because the character is less silly and more serious now.
Yeah, but there was still plenty of silliness, which is good. It's a good balance that they made with this movie. The whole time I was watching this movie, there really wasn't a moment where I kind of was groan or roll my eyes. I felt like they really had a great balance, and they used the established characters for the humor, Happy and Ned, and even MJ to an extent. There's a lot of humor with them. Even Spider-Man, or even Peter Parker, he can be humorous. And they really did a good job of balancing that humor and also having the drama, which Marvel is probably better at that than any movie series out there. At having you can have these super serious moments where it's life and death or character deaths that matter, but then you can also have just the funniest moments that just make you laugh out loud. And I thought they did a really good job of balancing that.
Yeah, I agree. I was really, really happy with majority of the film. And even the parts that felt like they were dragging a little bit, you knew that they were setting the stage for something more to happen. They did a really good job about building anticipation and not giving too much away about what was going to happen next, so that you stayed super invested the whole way through. And you just got to watch them strip Peter Parker down to the very end of the film, even when they stripped away everyone. So now what? That's my big question at the end of the film is, okay, so he's lost everything, everyone. He is literally in a world that doesn't know he exists. Now what?
You almost feel like they have to have some sort of a fix, something that they can do that's okay, now they get their memories back. Because it would be hard for him to reestablish those relationships with Ned, his best friend, or with MJ, people that mean so much to him, to start with them as strangers. It would be kind of an odd transition, and it would almost feel like their relationships wouldn't be as meaningful. So in a way, not that everybody needs to remember him, but I wouldn't mind there being some sort of a kind of easy reversal, we came up with this spell and okay, they got their memories back. Because it was so tragic at the end of the movie when he goes into the donut shop and has the conversation, and Ned doesn't even give him the time of day, and they're talking, MJ and Ned are talking about getting into MIT, and it was tear jerking. You're kind of you're wiping away tears to see what Peter's going through in that moment, and he kind of even backed off on telling, or at least talking to MJ about kind of who he was, because he just felt like maybe now wasn't the time, or I don't know.
Right.
It was really sad.
Well, and that's a question I have for both of you. Like, when it comes to Peter's choice, how did you? I mean, do you feel like he made the right choice? Was it a choice that felt like organic and right for this section of his arc, or were you hoping for something else?
It's not what I wanted to happen for him because he's little baby Peter and you want him to be happy at the end of the movie. But I don't disagree with the choice. I think it was right for his character. I think he was taking two pieces of advice, what Aunt May instilled in him, doing the right thing, because now his two best friends, the people he loves more than anything on this planet, have something good, and something good is going to be happening for them, and they're not struggling. They are not being not accepted to college because they're his friend. They aren't going to be in constant danger because of their affiliation with him and the inherent risk that comes with being close to him. And also what had been said to him about, I think it was the Green Goblin, telling him that he has to stop trying to live two lives and have it all because he can't. Or wait, was that Goblins? Was Goblin being cryptic with that one? I can't remember. Sorry.
I think he did say something like that.
Yeah,
because
I think it's him
Doctor
and as
Strange
well as
said
Doctor
it,
Strange
and Goblin said it.
Yeah.
I just rewatched the first Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movie, and I feel like there may even have been a conversation between him and Green Goblin in that movie that was similar, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah.
And it also echoes what happened with Andrew Garfield's relationship with Gwen Stacy's father.
Sure. Yep. Yeah. No, I mean, I feel like, you know, for this movie at least, it was the right choice, and I think it's emotionally the most affecting to have it end where he's making a very difficult decision on whether or not now is the right time to try and introduce himself to them and start that relationship again. And yes, I think, you know, we see Gwen does really say that she wants Peter to come in and, you know, be a part of her life again. But I can understand, like you were saying, Amanda, the struggle that Peter is seeing is they're safe. Like, and they're safe because they don't know me. And should I allow them to have their life without me for a while and see what happens later? And Aaron, I do think that with the Multiverse of Madness coming out, there may be some sort of like change for Peter in that, and you know they could easily do something in that creates the ability for people to remember who Peter Parker is again, if they want. Otherwise, it does create a really interesting conundrum. You know, like what do they do next? So, and how do they do it? So, I mean, and I don't really have an answer for that, but I think it's interesting because you do want to know, right? Like they leave you in a place where you actually want to see the next movie because you want to know what happens to this character and the other characters. It's
great for storytelling potential as well, because in a way they're wiping the slate clean. You know, this character doesn't have friends. He's not part of the Avengers anymore. He doesn't have Tony Stark to be there to kind of back him up. So we're really seeing kind of almost a reset of the character of Spider-Man in the MCU, where they can do new movies and have him start fresh. Not that they would do this, but they could even introduce like Gwen Stacy into the mix now. Maybe it's somebody new he meets that, you know, now he builds a relationship with her because that was an important character, you know, obviously in the previous movies and in the comics. So it just really opens the book for what they could do with this character now. And it's kind of a smart move, I think, from a storytelling perspective. There's so many possibilities.
Oh, 100%. Now with the multiverse being opened, we might not even get Gwen Stacy as we knew her in the Tobey Maguire as like a normal Gwen. We could get a Spider Gwen.
Yeah.
A live action Spider Gwen.
That would be cool.
That would be cool.
I would die.
Yeah. Although I guess Haley Steinfeld can't play her and Kate Bishop at the same time, so that's
I don't know.
bad.
It's a multiverse.
So.
Could,
this is true. This is true.
They could have Chris Evans come back as who did he play in Fantastic Four?
Oh, Johnny
Storm.
Yeah, absolutely. That would actually be kind of funny if him and Captain America met.
Meets himself.
One of the things that was great about Peter's story, and we were kind of talking about this idea of how things dovetail, but I really liked how the idea of choices and consequences dovetails into the villains and their choices and where, their lives led, because we see all of these villains who come back, Green Goblin, Doc Ock, Electro, Sandman, Lizard, and they all made choices in those previous films that led them to a place where they had a showdown with Spider-Man that led to their demise. And I thought that was really fascinating because, having them all back, it gives them the opportunity to do something different with them, but it also builds on the thematic elements of the choices we make and where they lead us in life. And so I was wondering for you guys, with the choices of bringing back all of these villains, what did you think about all of them being back, and did they all work for you being back, or did you feel like there were any of them that you were like, well, I don't know, you probably could have left them out and that would have been fine?
I think that they were all necessary for certain parts of the redemption story that they were trying to tell. Some of them aren't my favorite, but they did have a place in this film and they did make sense to the plot. I don't love Electro.
They improved him, I felt. Right? He was more entertaining
in this film. It was better. Yeah, because in the last one, he's just so much by himself that I felt like it didn't give the plot a lot of room to breathe, whereas in this one, there were more Spider-Men. So it made a little more sense for him to be this big, bad, all-powerful, energy-sucking entity when there were more people to keep him in check, as well as balancing everything else that was going on. And it was also cool to see how they kind of found their groove.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I felt like this movie worked well with all the different villains, because some of these villains don't stand well on their own. In their own movies, they weren't that interesting, but when you put them in a group like this, where it's okay, the focus seemed to be more on, Doc Ock and Green Goblin in this movie, but you had these other ones that were kind of more side characters. Sandman literally got put, just set aside at one point. They're here, stay inside this thing, so, but it was I think they had to have some balance between the three different Spider-Men. You wanted to have some representation of the different villains, that they've all faced, instead of having it focused only on villains, from the first Spider-Man. So I thought it worked well, and I'd love to know what the casting budget on this movie was. The fact that they were actually able to get all of them to come back and play those parts, and I thought they all did a really good job. In some ways, better than their original performances.
I thought Doc Ock was incredible. I was so excited to see him back. And did anyone have that moment of hesitation at the end of the film? I'm curious, where he had the arc reactor in his hand and you're like, is he about to make a bad decision? Because he's the power of the sun in your hand. Is this an uh-oh? Are we having more uh-oh?
Yeah, I definitely thought at the end that he might have kind of turned back. I'm like, oh no. And then it was cool though that he ultimately became a good guy. Which is, he was in his movie, he was overtaken by, something that wasn't really his fault. Something went wrong. The thing that was supposed to stop the arms from taking over his brain and taking control of him broke. And so he essentially was kind of, in a way, being brainwashed or not able to kind of control the power of those arms. So the fact that Peter was able to reverse that, we got to see Doc Ock as he really should be, as a person. And he actually ultimately used his powers for good in the end, which was a really good redemption for him.
Yeah. No, I agree with both of you, mainly because I think it's really interesting to give these characters a second chance to do things differently. And some of them choose differently, like Doc Ock. And, some of them choose the same way. And I think that's really fascinating. I did think it was interesting too, because with each of these characters, in many ways, the only way that the other Peters could have given them this chance was actually the technology that's available in this universe. So, like, Green Goblin, that Peter could have solved his problem. Obviously, Lizard, problem solved there. But the other characters, really the main way that they're able to be helped is all the technology that is available in this MCU version of the universe. And so I thought that was really fascinating. But I mean, again, like, I didn't love the Green Goblin in his original movie, but I felt like he was even better here. One, because they got rid of the stupid mask, and his costume looked better with him feeling more like the Green Goblin almost, with like the kind of like cloth hood over his face and like all that kind of stuff. It looked really good. You guys said everything I could say about Doc Ock. I think he was fantastic. And even Sandman gets more time, and like he's an interesting, good character, because again, he wasn't really a bad guy. He's just a guy who ends up falling into a super collider and gets turned into, an amorphous blob of sand. And, so he wasn't really a bad guy. He was just dealing with the ramifications of something terrible that happened to him. And, I think the only character here that I felt like was really underutilized and you might not necessarily have had in the movie was Lizard. He just doesn't have very much to do, and, they don't really focus on him at any point, really. And in many ways, as Garfield Spider-Man says, I already cured him once, I can do it again, so it's not as though there was anything revolutionary there. But the biggest thing I thought was really interesting was the question of the lesson that Peter learns, which was, are these gifts or are these curses? And the ability to recognize the difference is really important in life. And some of these characters do have gifts that they could utilize for the betterment of humanity, and they don't choose that. And some of them literally just have a curse, like Green Goblin. He can't recognize that his alter ego is a curse, not something that's beneficial or helpful in any way. And that was a really interesting question that I'm glad that they asked, because Electro could use his powers for good, but he chooses not to. So it's not a curse. It could be a gift, but the way he uses it is a curse to everybody else, and Doc Ock kind of the same way with what happened to him. So I thought I really liked that we kind of had that discussion a little bit in this film.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of these villains, their choices are what place them on one side or the other, not necessarily what their gifts are or what their curses are. It's how they choose to go forth with them. And unfortunately, a lot of these gifts and or curses happen because of quests for more, whether it's more power, more money, more technology. And they may start out as these pure ideals in the beginning, but as they dig further and further and further down the hole trying to find more, something changes and they can't go back.
Yeah, I think that there's different levels of these villains, kind of where they're at in this. You have Green Goblin, who was just straight up evil. And if you think back on his original movie, he kind of put that on himself. It wasn't an accident that happened to him. I mean, I guess in a way it kind of was, but he was really trying to do something that wasn't good. He's trying to get this military contract, and he's trying to experiment so he can, to prove that it works, so he can, get this military contract, and it ends up, injecting himself with this thing, with that serum that turns him, into what he becomes. But then someone like Sandman, like you said, who it was kind of more of an accidental thing. He was at a point as a villain where I didn't see him as good or bad in this movie. He was just kind of indifferent. He just didn't care. He just wanted to, get out of there. Electro was maybe the most interesting because he's the one where you could see he could have made either decision. And once he got kind of a sense of that extra power that he had access to in this new universe, ultimately his true nature came out. You know, he could have been cured. They showed that little green dial that was going around on his chest that was going to kind of take it away, and it was like that very last step where he could have been done with it, and he ultimately said, no, I don't want to give up this power. There's too much to be gained here. So I thought they did such a good job with the different dynamics of all the different villains.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I like that you said that, Aaron, because I love how, again, that dovetails with the whole idea of whether or not, the lesson of responsibility. With great power comes great responsibility. And what do we see these characters, these villains do? They decide to deal with their power in a way that they don't want to take any responsibility for their power. They just want to utilize that power for their own benefit. There's no thought process as to other people, and there's no thought process as to the idea of like doing what is right, even when it costs you everything. Because these people would not do what is right when it would cost them everything, because they're not willing to give up their power in any way, shape, or form, especially if it's going to cost them. And so I think that the movie does a great job of really working all of these things together in a way that helps drive its point home by showing, not telling, and allowing these characters to, be who they need to be organically with the story. And I really appreciate that. And it's one of the things I think that makes this movie really work. Now, something that's huge in this movie is the fact that, as rumored, there are quite a few special guests, and two very important special guests of Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield being back as Spider-Man to help Peter, kind of, because he has nobody else. There's no Aunt May now, and they are the ones who are going to help this version of Peter through his pain, through his rage. And at the same time, as we talked about earlier, everybody's being given a second chance in this movie, and they are even given a second chance. And so what did you guys, was this worth it? Were you glad they brought them back? How did this all end up working for you guys?
This was so worth it. I am so glad that the rumor mill was not wrong and we got all of the Spider-Men back. And I think for me, the most important and heartfelt moment was when our Andrew Garfield Spider-Man caught MJ. Because seeing her falling in the trailers, I was like, are they doing this to me again? Because I don't think I can watch. But seeing him get that moment and making the save and having it all come full circle and knowing that he still can save people that he cares about, that was so special to me.
Yeah. You're not alone. He's my favorite Spider-Man. And so that moment just really hit home for me. And you could see he's such a good actor. Like he's been in other movies, Oscar nominees and all this stuff. Like he's proven himself as an actor. For him to come back and do a superhero movie is pretty awesome. But he just, that whole scene was perfect. And I know it's a little cheesy, they're calling back to stuff and they're really trying to kind of do a bit of fan service, but I didn't mind it. And, just his acting in that scene, you could tell it meant so much to him as a character when he catches her and actually saves her. And, you can just see in his face that he's holding back tears, and MJ's kind of she's probably been, she's been saved by Spider-Man or caught by Spider-Man enough that she probably doesn't think much of it. She's like, are you okay? It was such I'm with you, Amanda. That one, I get teary-eyed in movies in certain moments, and that one got me for sure. But
there were some tears.
But from the rumor mill perspective, I purposely didn't follow a lot of the spoilers for this movie. But I think the idea of those two actors coming back was you just couldn't avoid it. I kept hearing it. There's rumors, but I still didn't buy into it. I'm I'm not going to get excited for it because for all I know, these people could just be completely misinformed. And I don't want to go into this movie expecting this awesome moment and then it never happening and just being like really disappointed. So I literally went into the movie thinking that they weren't going to be in it. And if at the most, maybe they would have like a cameo, you know, where they would just show up for like a minute. So when they actually did show up, and then the extent that they actually used them, you know, I was just blown away. And honestly, for me, it made the movie. I don't know that I would have thought so highly of this movie without them bringing them back. Mm-hmm. I think I enjoyed their, you know, kind of what they did more than Tom Holland in this movie. I know it's Tom Holland's movie, but it's kind of hard not to overshadow him with kind of these more iconic, especially someone like Tobey Maguire, who kind of, you know, was the original Spider-Man in a lot of ways. Yeah, I absolutely love that they brought him back. I think it really worked, and they used all three of them uniquely, and they all had their unique personalities, and it worked so well.
Yep.
Yeah, I think I'm with you, Aaron. I didn't follow a lot of the spoilers, but like you said, because I don't do that with any movie, but, you know, it was hard not to hear the rumors that they were going to be in the film. And so I was thinking that they would be, because why wouldn't you, honestly? But you never know, right? And so, but like you both, I think they were used to perfection in the film. I thought it was just so much fun to have them back. And it was fun to kind of see all of their different personalities play together, you know, and because Andrew Garfield is kind of the slightly more outgoing version of Spider-Man, and, you know, the one who's more willing to make the joke and kind of trash talk and that kind of stuff. Tobey Maguire, I think he did a great job in the sense that he really plays the Spider-Man like his age, which he's older, he's more mature, he is, you know, he's the grandpa of the group in many ways, or I would say he's more the father, you know. I mean, Tobey Maguire's definitely the dad here, or the youth pastor, and Andrew Garfield is definitely the cool uncle, basically, and so I thought that they really utilized him well. But like you both said, I think the thing that meant the most is that emotional scene on top of the roof when they're talking to him. And Aaron, I was thinking to myself, do they overshadow the movie because I'm more connected with them as characters because they have so far had better stories as Spider-Man in the sense of like the emotional weight? Does that overshadow here? And in some ways it does. But by the end of the movie, then when Tom Holland makes his choice, you know, as his Spider-Man, to not tell MJ and Ned who he is, that hit you with the gut punch there. So it's like they utilize these Spider-Men to help drive home the lesson that we need this Spider-Man to learn. And by the end, you're having the emotional reaction to his choices that you're having to them remembering their choices. And I was like, that's really well done. And it's definitely handled so that you really appreciate them being back, but it doesn't take away from the journey that you went on with Tom Holland's Peter. It actually adds to that. But it adds to their stories, because it literally helps their movies. You can go back and watch their movies and realize that their story doesn't end there, that it actually culminates in this opportunity for them to have a second chance to do things better, to be even better Spider-Man than they were. And like, that's cool. And then your mind is like, well, what are their universes look like now that those things have changed? Like, it's a really well done thing. And I loved having both of them back. And yes, I've mentioned the youth pastor joke, but I laughed so hard with that because I've been a youth pastor and I've known a bunch of them. And like, yeah, man, dressing like a cool youth pastor is a thing. So Aaron does it all the time. And so I just like having them back was great. And Aaron, you and I wanted to have this conversation because you and I were kind of having it offline, but I thought it was interesting to bring it in here. Like, to me, this is the way that you honor the past of something and also build on it for a future. And we've seen, and I'll bring it up, it could be a sore spot for people, but I don't think the sequels of Star Wars do this half as well as this movie does here by honoring the past, using the characters in the present, and illuminating the future for the new characters. Like, this movie is everything that the sequel trilogy, I think, should have been and wasn't for me. So I'm interested for your thoughts on that, because I think, you know, utilizing this nostalgia is something that's a big deal these days, and I feel like this is the movie that shows how it's done right.
I'd have to agree to some extent there, because they didn't throw away moments. Sometimes physically throw away moments, but we won't talk about that one because that one still hurts me a little bit on the inside. No, they take these pregnant moments that have so much meaning and they let them overwhelm you. They let them come to fruition. And that was so exciting and meaningful. And I felt like it really added a lot to the film and to all of the characters. And it gave, like you said, all of their previous films in their respective universes a lot more meaning, as well as giving Tom Holland's Spider-Man this place to go forward with, and the knowledge of both of them that they could impart on him. And it wasn't that they didn't take anything away. They just added. And that was really nice.
They accentuated
Yes!
what had come before. Yeah, absolutely.
So, Matt, I won't turn your podcast into a defense of the sequel trilogy, but
hey, man, if you need to defend a sequel trilogy here, that's totally fine.
It's a Spider-Man
So,
podcast. But
I asked the question, so I opened the door.
I think it's different. I do think that Marvel did it perfectly, and I also would say the same for Into the Spider-Verse, how they handled, you know, bringing Spider-Man in and also having Miles. So you hand it off to the new generation, but you also respect the old generation. And I think Marvel did it really well. I think it's hard to compare a Marvel comic universe to Star Wars, which is not, you know, it's a fantasy epic. The storytelling's a little bit different. They're not doing so much like, what do the fans want to see? It's kind of like, what's the story that needs to be told? And that's where I think it's hard to compare. But I do agree with you that from a fan perspective and like an excitement perspective, this movie hit all the right notes when it came to the nostalgia. You know, just bringing those characters back alone is a huge nostalgic moment. But then the way they utilized those characters and gave them each, you know, funny moments. They gave each of them heroic moments, you know, redemptive moments. It was all these things where people like Luke and Han didn't get those moments, really, right?
Sure.
Because that's what served that story. But for, you know, the Marvel universe, you can do some of that stuff and get away with it. And I thought, you know, it worked really well with both of those characters and the moments that they gave them.
Mm-hmm. You know, what's fascinating to me is kind of the question just being asked as I did, because I had that question, you know, as I was mentioning, with them being back, like, are they overshadowing the movie? And that's the exact thing that, you know, JJ said with Luke was, no, we can't have Luke because he's going to overshadow the movie. And it feels like Sony was like, F that, we don't care if they overshadow the movie. We know what the fans want, and we're going to give it to them. And we're not going to care whether they overshadow. In fact, but the point is that they don't in the end, because they engineer the story in a way to which they help tell the story for Tom Holland's Spider-Man, so that by the end, when it is just him, you're feeling for him because of everything that they used with those previous characters. And that is good writing.
And they use their experience. Like, if they weren't there, Tom, I'm going to call him Tom. Spider-Man 1.
Yeah, do. You're friends. I mean, it's fine.
He wouldn't have made the right decision in the end, right? Like, he was going to
Absolutely.
kill Green Goblin.
No.
He was definitely going to kill him. And if it wasn't for the, Tobey Maguire, I think was the one that stopped him, right?
Spider-Man
2. Yeah. He stopped him from doing it, and they kind of talked him off the ledge. And then you have Andrew Garfield, who apparently his Spider-Man has gone pretty dark from what he was saying. And he was saying, I don't want to see you go down that same path. And so he could learn from their experiences, and it propels his story forward. So it was really strong in how they did that stuff for sure.
Yeah. And I felt like they did it in a way where they built up each of those characters.
Yes.
They built up our Tom Holland Spider-Man. They built up our Tobey Maguire Spider-Man. They built up our Andrew Garfield Spider-Man. They gave each of them something back. And that was really incredible to see happen on screen.
As far as the overshadowing, though, I will disagree a little bit. I do think they did it. I do think they overshadowed him in a way. And it's probably for kind of more long-term fans.
Sure.
Like newer fans that like Tom Holland is their Spider-Man. They're probably like, oh, who are these old guys showing up? Like, okay, it's kind of cool. But for people like us that kind of grew up with that and we really lived through those older Spider-Man movies, I was kind of more excited about what Andrew Garfield was doing in that movie than I was Tom Holland. And by the end, I was like, all I could think about when I was leaving the theater was, oh, maybe they'll give Andrew Garfield another Spider-Man movie. I mean, they've just literally opened up the multiverse. Why not? Why not have an amazing Spider-Man movie that can still live within the MCU, because now the multiverse is a thing. So, and who knows? I mean, if this movie does well enough, you might see Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire, both getting their own Spider-Man movies, or maybe they come back and, revisit the idea of the multiverse and they come back and help Tom Holland in a future movie. But, if there's money to be made, they will use these ideas.
Well, and I think, like you said, do they overshadow? And I think in some ways, like you said, rightly, for people that are older, they might have that effect. But for myself, I loved what they did in their movies. I came out appreciating their movies even more, even maybe Spider-Man 3, because one, Tobey Maguire makes a great joke about the idea of having the existential crisis where, he gets blocked with his webs and being able to use them, which was like, oh, well, if we're going to reference Spider-Man 3, that's probably the best way to do it. But at the same time, like this movie, by taking the journey that it did finally with Tom Holland's Spider-Man, I felt like it earned my investment in the character. And that wasn't possible necessarily without those two helping be there too. And so even though for me as well, there might be some overshadowing happening, at the same time, I still cared about his character in the end because of the story they told. And, if you're going to hit the nostalgia button, I think they hit it perfectly. And that's the thing where it's like, I'm just going to say it. They were fearful in the sequel trilogy, and they let fear tell the story instead of just telling the story that they should have told in the first place, and just let the chips fall where they may. And Marvel took a huge risk with this movie, and ain't it paying off gangbusters, so I'm just saying. I do have to ask you one more special guest. We can't forget it, but yes, Matt Murdock was finally in the MCU. And didn't you just love seeing Daredevil as his lawyer?
Yes. It took me a minute to catch on to who he was, because I was thinking, Eric's like, it's Daredevil. It's Daredevil. I'm like, what? No red suit. Oh, yeah, he was a lawyer, wasn't he? So it was really nice to get that little callback. And I'm wondering, because it seems like they're setting up in a lot of the more recent films some new characters. So I'm anticipating that we're going to get a Daredevil film at some point in the future.
Or at least him being part of a future movie, maybe not his own standalone. But it is interesting how they used him, because the other characters coming from a different universe, you can bring in anybody, and have it be part of the multiverse. But they actually had him as part of that universe. And they had previously said that the Netflix shows weren't kind of part of the MC universe anymore. So we wouldn't expect to see these characters show up. But the fact that they brought him in I think it speaks to how popular that character was. I don't know that we should expect to see, some of the other Marvel. I don't know if Jessica Jones is going to show up anytime soon or anything like that.
Right.
But I think he was, very popular, and they've recognized that. So if you're going to bring any of them in, he's a good one to bring in. I do hope we see him suit up in a future movie. And I didn't really watch the Daredevil series. I watched, I think, maybe part of the first season. I liked what I saw, but I think once they kind of started to go away from those shows and the Disney stuff became more the standard, I kind of just didn't take my time to go catch up on those shows because I was like, well, I guess they don't count anymore. So,
well, and I think the answer is now they do.
I think that one does.
Daredevil is there, but I mean, if Daredevil is there, he interacted with all of those other characters. Like, he's a part of their story. So it's like, to me, they have to be.
Well, I think that's like the Thrawn logic.
And Kingpin is in.
That's cool too.
Hawkeye. So I'm just saying.
Yeah, but it's kind of the Thrawn logic where just because Thrawn shows up.
Oh, did I spoil something?
I didn't see it yet.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, dang it. Oh well. Forget what I just said. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain in the big white suit.
But yeah, like I was saying, I think just because he showed up doesn't mean everything we've seen him do previously happened.
It could be that, but I mean, and I don't know. I hope they're saying that. It's funny because I had actually just gone back and I had never watched season 3 of Daredevil. I'd seen everything else, and it's one of those where I hate the way Netflix does things where they just drop a season and then like nobody remembers it's there. So I forgot that it was there, and I finally went back and rewatched it, and then I was glad I did because, I just seen Daredevil season 3. And so, like, to me, I'm right there with you, Aaron. I hope he's back. And to me, honestly, if you're smart, you put Daredevil in the next Spider-Man movie and they team up. I think that would be fantastic. And finally give Daredevil, like, his really cool baton things that help him swing around so he can swing around with Spider-Man. Like, that'd be legit. So, something really quick I noticed is that this movie seemed to be a civil war between Strange and Peter, in the sense that it's a civil war of ideas again, where, Dr. Strange is talking about this idea of that it's someone's fate. Like, we can't change their fate. In the long scheme of things, it's better if we don't even try. We just got to let them go back to their universe. And Peter's is like, no, we should give them a second chance. If we can make that happen, we should do it. And I thought that was really interesting because to me, it is kind of a fascinating question about, are we playing the statistics game, or are we just going to do what's right regardless? And, Peter comes down on the side of doing what's right for these characters. And I think, he proves to be right in the end. And that was really interesting to me, that these two kind of have this civil war fight of ideas and Peter wins.
But does he win?
I guess that'll be the question.
Because these choices come at such heavy losses and potentially are catapulting the storyline forward into the multiverse of madness. Although I also think what went on in the Loki show is...
Well, that's true,
behind the scenes, fracturing the seams there, too.
Right.
So there's a lot of different big question, big moment things happening in different aspects of this MCU at this moment that are going to lead into this next movie. But all of his choices came at really heavy casualties for himself.
Mm-hmm.
And he kind of caused the initial issue anyways.
Well, it's true,
He was kind of paying the price for some of his early on mistakes. Yep. And it's funny because as I get older, I find myself siding with the adults more than the teenagers typically. Like when there's a confrontation between Strange and Peter, I was kind of like, come on, Peter, quit being, you're messing things up. Like, if you just listen to the adult, but in the end, I think Peter's compassion is what came through, and the decision that Strange would have made once they were put in that position to make that decision would have been heartless. He's like, well, it's their fate. They just need to, face their fate. And you can kind of see the logic behind that because it's the safest route. Just send them back. Let's not mess anything up.
This isn't our timeline. This isn't our
Right.
problem.
But Peter was more
Right.
compassionate, and I think with, Aunt May's influence as well helped. But
Yeah.
I do try to remind myself that everything wouldn't have gone so wrong if it wasn't for Peter kind of initially messing things up.
If he had just talked to the school administrator, it would have been fine.
Yeah, it even Strange's reaction to that. I was like, wait, you didn't even talk, like you didn't even try to. Yeah, it was funny.
Rectify this. Yeah.
Well, and I think, what was interesting is it's very snarky, obviously, but, MJ has a point for Strange when she says, this is kind of your fault. It's your spell that got messed up. And part of that was that he doesn't ask any questions of Peter before he starts making this decision. He's not like, well, Peter, have you thought about talking to the administrator? Have you talked to him? Like, he doesn't do any of the verification either. Mm-hmm. And so it's like they're both kind of at fault here for not asking questions. And so to me, that is kind of interesting. And, I do think, though, it is kind of par for the course for what we know of Strange. Like, he's very Tony Stark-like in that he's all about himself and has very little time for other people in the end. Like, he has much of the same personality as Tony did, especially when he first came into the MCU. And he still kind of has that. And I'm hoping it'll be really interesting as we move forward with him to see if they kind of bring that character on any journeys to kind of help him grow and change. Because right now he's a little bit of a narcissist who kind of is just wrapped up in himself. In much the same way Tony was before, many of his bad choices led him to have to make other choices, or else he was in a world of hurt.
Didn't he tell Peter that he loved him at the end of the movie? He said, he said, he didn't say those direct words, but he basically said, everyone that you love, we will forget you. And like, he included himself in that.
Right.
And
but without actually saying
so he found a roundabout way of saying that he loved him. And I think that did show that he does care about Peter, even though he maybe closes himself off in a lot of ways. I think Tony Stark showed his, affection for Peter much more openly. But I think Strange also, probably like all the Avengers, how do you not like Spider-Man? But I think he really did care for him in the end and was hoping that he's making the right decision, because he's like, do you realize none of us are going to remember you? I mean, you had that thrown right in your face when Happy is at the grave site with him and Happy doesn't even remember him. And it's just like so heart-wrenching to see, like, wow, they had such a close relationship, and Happy, although being, nice to this kid that he meets at the gravestone, they don't, that previous relationship is now gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But can we talk for a minute about how frivolous Strange's decision-making was in this film? Because, like you said, he literally didn't ask any questions. Nothing. And with what we got at the end credits, I'm wondering if the frivolity of his decision-making leads to some of what we see the potential of him becoming could be. And I'm not sure. I thought at one point during this film that this was going to be like a multiverse version of Doctor Strange, because the decisions that he had made in this film were so not characteristic of him. Like, he was going to let the entire universe unravel just to let people remember Peter. He was giving a high school kid who couldn't get into college free spells.
It did seem frivolous, but it also felt convenient for the storytelling. Like, sometimes there's moments where I'm like, that is way out of character for a character to do, but the writers needed him to do it. And you almost blame the writers more than the character at that point. That's kind of where I was with it. Yeah. Because, some of the stuff he was doing when he's casting that spell, and then Peter's like, well, wait, what about this? And he's trying to fix it. And it's like almost this comedic moment. It's like the writers were like, we need something that's going to break this, and so the only person to put that on is Strange at that point, even if it doesn't seem to really fit with his character.
And shame on Wong for letting him.
He was like, leave me out of this. I love that.
Yeah. I think when it comes to Strange, like I do think it's kind of par for the course for his character to do this kind of thing. And part of that, I think we got an indication of like, he's more wrapped up and kind of hurt about quote unquote, about the fact that he's not Sorcerer Supreme anymore because of a technicality. Like he seems to be in a place emotionally that's not great, really. And I think that plays out in the choices that he makes with Peter. And I think that is going to be part of where he goes next. Like you said, like what happens in his movie, it's going to play into the fact that he hasn't made some great choices. And those choices can play one of two ways, right? He can become the villain or he can become the hero. And you know what they say about living long enough to become, the villain. So,
you guys watched What If?
I have
No,
not
I
yet.
have not.
See, Amanda, you need to watch it because there's a key episode with Strange where there's some echoes to stuff that you see. I won't give away too much, but there's some echoes to what you see in this movie and also in that trailer.
Is he green tinged?
That you can. I'm not going to give away anything. You just need to watch it. But yeah, you should watch. What If. It was actually a pretty good animated series.
Well, we'll definitely be watching it for Assembling Avengers. So John will be going through that because we're going through everything MCU related in that show. So we'll be doing that there. That'll be a lot of fun. I did want to ask you guys about, Peter's good friends because, like, we learned some fun things. Ned is magic, and MJ is herself. Because, in all honesty, I thought it was really interesting that before we get to Ned, I don't really feel like MJ has a ton to do in this movie. Am I wrong?
I think she's the catalyst. I think the hurt that she feels and the disappointment and how she downplays all of that and how much Peter knows that means to her when they do get rejected from college because of their affiliation with him is what catapults him to make his next decision. So she was kind of the match.
She's definitely
and I think that was
an important character in this movie. Who she is important to Peter, but as far as like having a purpose to do things during the movie, yeah, you're right. There wasn't a lot for her to do. It was like her and Ned were almost a singular character. They were always together. They were kind of doing the same things, and they were just there as Peter's friends. But yeah, in the end, Ned got the cool magical powers, and MJ didn't. But I really I've grown to like her as a character. I didn't like her her initial introduction as MJ, but I got to. She grew on me a little bit more in the second movie, and in this movie, I really do enjoy her dynamic with Peter. So I'm on board with Zendaya as MJ for sure. But she didn't seem to have a lot to do in this one.
Yeah, I would have liked to see more of her, but I understand that with how saturated the story was with every other character that they pulled in from every other universe, you just have so much time in a film before you run out, and they made time for what was most purposeful to the storytelling.
Yeah, it made sense for her to not be a central focus in this one, at least. She was much more in the last one.
Yeah.
I also think it was interesting, too, and one of the things I enjoyed about her character here in this movie, like you said, Aaron, she hasn't necessarily been my favorite character in these films so far, but I felt like in many ways this third go-around, they'd kind of softened her character a little bit, and she didn't feel like she had to be so antagonistic because she's more comfortable with Ned and Peter now. She doesn't feel like she has to be on and defensive all the time with them, which is great. And I think it made for a better version of the character. Ned gets, I guess, the biggest reveal on the fact that apparently he's magic. Apparently could be a sorcerer too, like Doctor Strange, which is kind of interesting choice for them to do with that character. And makes me wonder, where they'll go with him. I mean, are they gonna follow that up now and have him training with Doctor Strange.
But how? Because would Doctor Strange remember Ned because he's now forgotten Peter Parker?
That's a good question.
Yeah, you can't pull on that thread too hard because I think there's a lot that you could start to unravel. Like, well, if Peter doesn't exist, then there's a lot of other things that would have to.
Yeah.
But they remember Spider-Man, just not
right.
anything else beyond the fact that there is a Spider-Man that they've interacted with, and
So,
that's at surface
I
level.
guess Strange would have to remember Spider-Man helping him save the universe, but he wouldn't remember Peter Parker being
That's
Spider-Man.
why I said you can't pull on the thread too hard because I do think you could start to unravel the logic around it a bit. But Ned, I think, like I said earlier, I think Ned having this power was almost, they needed it for the story. And so it was kind of like, oh, it would be kind of cool if Ned has this. And they made a joke about it early on where he thought he might have magic and he felt tingling in his fingers and Strange like kind of shrugged it off like, okay, whatever. And then he ends up actually having magic. And I thought, I liked it. I thought it was funny. I think Ned is a funny character. And then they did need those moments where he could, open up portals. So you needed a second character that could do that. And there was only one Strange. So it kind of made sense that they kind of wrote it into the story. Rewinding a little bit back to MJ, I'll say, I agree with you that her character has softened. I think part of it is her personality as a character. She puts up these walls. And so in our first introduction to her, is her giving the middle finger, to Peter, right? In study hall or something, I think. Or maybe it's not the first introduction, but it's one of the first moments between them. And she does have this kind of hard exterior. She's kind of rude to him. But then by this movie, they're like in a relationship and they're open with each other. And I think because she's taken those walls down, we're really seeing the true MJ without her having that kind of shield up. And I'm a sucker for like a nice romantic story between characters that I think it works for. And I thought to see these two characters kind of in that part of their relationship where they're openly admitting they're in love with each other and kind of boyfriend and girlfriend was kind of sweet to watch.
And I thought that they did a really good job with their relationship, making it make sense for how old they are. These are high school kids. So the FaceTime conversation, like, Happy was making fun of them, but that's what kids do. And I felt like they didn't age up their romance.
Right.
It was impulsive. It was sweet. It was long, silly conversations that didn't really have a point or an end in sight. And it was 18-year-olds.
Right.
Yeah.
And that made me really, really happy to see, because they've been doing that a lot more, I feel like, in film and TV, is making the teenagers actually act like teenagers instead of college kids or young adults. So it was really refreshing to see that younger relationship playing.
They've come a long way since Tobey Maguire's version of Spider-Man and their version of MJ. Like, that relationship was, it always kind of awkward. It was like he was kind of obsessed with her, a little creepy about it. And I don't know, like, that one it didn't feel as genuine to me as, I thought the Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone one was more genuine, and I like that one. And then I think what they're doing with MJ in this one, in the new movies with Tom Holland, I think that it does feel genuine. Yeah. It feels like those two characters genuinely like each other. There wasn't some sort of like Peter falling in love with the girl next door and trying to like win her over. It was just a mutual, like, they met each other, they spent time together and they like each other.
No, I agree with both of you. I think I really enjoyed them together. And I think, like you rightly pointed out, Amanda, there's so much going on in this movie that I think they knew there were some places where something was going to have to give. And this movie, I think, in many ways is more about Peter anyway. And so they gave that story more weight, especially with his relationship with, the other Spider-Man and helping him through, losing Aunt May. And so a question I got to ask you, obviously it's an action movie. It's a comic book movie. And so what did you guys end up thinking of the action and I guess even the effects of the film?
I loved it. I mean, I'm always a sucker for good graphics, and I love the feeling that you get when they do like the first person web slinging look, like you're kind of flying too. So everything that they did in this film was great. I thought that they did a beautiful job with the graphics for Electro, and Sandman was much improved from the initial. So yeah, I really liked everything they did. Although I think Lizard or Lizardo, Lizard, help,
Lizard, yeah.
Lizard. I think that Lizard looked a little off. Like, I think maybe they could have spent more time on him, but you can't win them all. They did a lot.
Mm-hmm.
No, I agree. I thought it gave them a chance to kind of make some of the older characters look better. And even Spider-Man, they've come such a long way from the original movie. Like I said, I just watched it the other day after I watched this movie, and that original Tobey Maguire movie, the special effects just at that time weren't great. Like at the time, we probably thought they were great, but now looking back,
Right.
It's really hokey in certain areas. And so, yeah, it was kind of cool to see his version of Spider-Man, Andrew Garfield's version of Spider-Man, really get that, modern special effects treatment along with all these other villains who,
Mm-hmm.
I thought Doc Ock, they obviously did some de-aging on his face, and that did stand out a little to me. Even in the trailer, I remember when he first showed up in the trailer, I'm like, oh, okay, there's some obvious de-aging going on here. But that was the only thing that stood out to me that felt a little, I don't know if they could have refined it a little more, but that's a tough one.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
I think the action was really fun. I thought, for the most part, it felt really well staged and filmed for the most part. I mean, obviously, the fight with Doctor Strange was really cool in the mirror, zone or whatever they call it, the mirror universe. I guess it's not the mirror universe, although
Mirrorverse.
he does have a goatee. So, Star Trek joke. And so but I don't think all the effects were great. I do think that there were places where the effects showed that they could have spent more time on it. I specifically think any time that Goblin is flying around doesn't look great. There were times when I didn't think the CGI smoke works well. When they're on the battle on the bridge, there are times when I'm like, that's just not real smoke. It's just, I can tell it's CGI, and that's not great. But overall, it didn't detract from the movie. And when we got to the end battle where all the Spider-Men are doing their thing, there were some really gorgeous shots and some really fun things that were happening there. So in the end, it's not something that's detrimental to the film, but I do feel like Marvel needs to up its game because when it comes to effects, because all of its movies this year, there have been some dodgy effects in them. And it's like you're getting a little bit lazy and allowing movies to not look as good as they could by kind of maybe farming it out to too many different effects houses that maybe aren't necessarily up to the level of something like just ILM doing most of the work, which usually, for the most part, ILM is the hall, the Bridgewater Mark, that or Weta Digital, So again, it doesn't kill the movie for me, but there are points where I'm like, guys, come on, it's Marvel, you do better.
I wonder if they blew it on the casting budget.
There you go. Yes, that's where all the money went. So
I'm okay with that. I'm okay with a little bit less special effects and more good casting.
Exactly. And more Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire. Yes, please. I wanted to ask you guys real quick because Michael Giacchino does the music here, and I really noticed some of the score, which doesn't always happen in a Marvel movie. As I mentioned, John and I are going through stuff with Assembling Avengers, and sometimes we talk about the soundtrack and we're like, But this one, there are some really beautiful cues that accentuated the intense emotion. So I wanted to know what you guys thought of that.
I loved it. He's one of my absolute favorite film composers. and he's scored two of my favorite movies, Rogue One and Up. And I think that he really was perfect for this film, and I don't think I could have asked more from the score personally.
Yeah, I like the Up reference. Fantastic movie. Yeah, I like him as a composer as well.
Reference.
But I'm not a big score person with movies. Like I'm just not. That's not typically what stands out to me, although the music was great, but it's not something where I'll pick up on like, oh wait, that's the same cue from this, or like a lot of people can do those connections, especially in Star Wars movies. That just isn't a big thing for me. So I'll leave that discussion to you guys.
I liked it too, Amanda. And I think he's created a pretty decent Spider-Man theme too, which plays. But he also worked in the other two Spider-Man themes from the other two Spider-Man movies. That was great when they were all fighting together, which was really cool. And like I mentioned, I thought he created some really beautiful pieces of music that went with those very dramatic moments that were happening. And he's pretty good at that. I mean, when I think of Rogue One, where, he takes the quiet music for the destruction of the gate, as the Star Destroyers, and it's the pivotal moment for the rebellion, right? This is their first victory. He scores it beautifully. Here, he scores some things really beautifully. So I thought he did a great job, and I really liked that. And so we talked about the Multiverse of Madness trailer with the stinger already a little bit and where it's going to go with Doctor Strange. So we really only have, I think, one thing left before we get to some ratings, which is, what did you think of the Venom stinger and where that leaves us, I guess, of where we could go next?
Well, first off, which multiverse is Eddie Brock from? Is he from Andrew Garfield's? Is he from Tobey Maguire's? Or is he someplace totally separate? That's my one lingering question, is where does he fit in all of those ones? And if so, we already have another Eddie Brock dangling around in there. So I'm just wondering how he fits into all of that. And then when we get the little bit of Venom left over, they're opening another door here. But does that mean we're going to get a different Venom actor? Or are we going to get a Spider-Man Venom again?
All interesting possibilities. I do think they were kind of implying that this is so this version of Venom is not part of the MCU universe that we know, because those films are kind of a separate thing. So when he's like, I thought it was really funny how he's having the conversation with the bartender, and he's kind of like,
who is Danny Rojas?
Yes, Danny Rojas from what's the show? Ted Lasso. But yeah, he's having the conversation and he's kind of like, wait, there's a big purple guy and all this stuff like he's not aware of, like all these things that happen in the actual main universe. And so he has been pulled in to that universe from whatever the Venom universe is. I don't remember if Andrew Garfield ever had any Venom references. But I know that obviously like Tobey Maguire's movie had Venom in it already. So it's obviously not from Tobey Maguire's universe. At least that's the way I'm thinking. And probably not from Andrew Garfield's either. So I'm thinking it's a separate universe that he's in, that he got pulled in, and then when they, sent everybody back, he just got sent back too. So, but I do think leaving behind some of the, the goo, what's the right word for that?
Symbiote?
Yeah, symbiote. Leaving some of that behind does open some interesting story possibilities that maybe the MCU will run with. Like, okay, we're going to have our own version of Venom in the MCU, and this is explaining why. So it is kind of connected to the Sony movies, but not, maybe it will be a different actor.
This version of Venom, I think, is in the same universe as what's coming out with Morbius, that movie, and they're saying that's their own universe. They're answering the question of whether or not these universes are connected. But of course they are connected because they're part of the multiverse of Marvel. And so, it's interesting to me. It would be fascinating to see them to do a version of Venom with this version of Spider-Man, possibly. and hopefully do it better than what they did in Spider-Man 3. That would be great. Heck, I'd even like to see Venom better done than in the Venom movies, because I did not like the original Venom movie, and I didn't even see the second one because it looked terrible. So
I haven't seen either of them.
Yeah.
I tend to not like superhero movies that are like rated R, when they go that kind of that route with it and become kind of ultra violent. Like Deadpool, for example. I like the idea of Deadpool, and I think they're fun movies, but I wish they would leave out some of the more rated R stuff. I tend to like my superhero movies to be PG-13, so I haven't gotten into watching the Venom movies, but I'll watch them eventually. So I didn't have a lot of background on the character as played by Tom Hardy, but I liked the scene that he was in. He did a good job in that scene. It was entertaining. You mentioned Morbius. I believe did you see the Morbius trailer that played before the movie?
Yeah.
I did.
So they had the one character from Tom Holland Spider-Man movies in Vulture in that trailer. So it's kind of implying that Morbius is part of Tom Holland's Spider-Man universe,
MCU.
right?
Well, yeah, but they also said like that thing that happened in San Francisco, and that's a reference to Venom, because Venom's in San Francisco. So I feel like they're implying that the Vulture character exists in that universe, but it's a different because they're playing with the multiverse.
Well,
it's
J. Jonah Jameson is the same actor in two different universes, so yeah, so it does make sense.
He's still a jerk.
Yeah, he's more bald. I forgot how he had that flat top in the original Tobey Maguire movie. I forgot about that.
Well, we have spent almost an hour and a half, which is not shocking when it comes to talking about a movie of this magnitude. And thank you both for being here for it. But, before we leave, I really want to know then, as we've had, I think, mostly praise for this film, what would you guys rate Spider-Man No Way Home?
So what's the scale here?
Let's do it out of 5.
I would give it a 4.5. I was highly entertained. I was engaged. I enjoyed how they had the most well-done fan service I've seen in a really long time. I mean, I don't think they had any major misses. Just that lizard looked kind of weird. That's about it.
Fan service done right. Yes. It was. Yeah, I'm in the same place. Like, I have a hard time not giving it 5 out of 5. I absolutely love the experience of watching this movie. It surprised me in a lot of ways, even though I kind of heard the rumors that these actors were going to be back. The fact that they used them so well and so much in the movies, and both of them just did such a stellar job in their parts. I would say Tobey Maguire this is the best version of Spider-Man he's played. I want to see movies of this version of Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, because he did such a good job. So yeah, it knocked it out of the park for me. Best Spider-Man movie I've seen since Into the Spider-Verse. I kind of was bouncing back and forth which one's my favorite of those two. I think this one might just barely inch it out that this is a little bit better to me than Into the Spider-Verse, just for some of the nostalgia. And that the scene between the two old Spider-Men cracking his back was hilarious. So, I can relate with the sore back.
Yeah, that was really funny, because I was thinking to myself, old guys like Aaron and I are going to be like, oh man, can he do that to me? That would be great. 100%. That's exactly how I would feel. I really enjoyed this movie, and it's been the best version of Tom Holland's Spider-Man that we've gotten in the MCU, hands down. I mean, I don't even think that's a question. And it turned out to be one of the better movies of the MCU as well. I would say that for me, it probably is a little bit uneven, though. I feel like the first part of the movie is kind of like classic, jokey, ultra jokey Marvel, and a lot of what I don't love about Tom Holland's Spider-Man in the other movies. But the second half of the movie seriouses itself up, and I think really becomes a much better film when they do that. And I finally feel like they've given this character the weight he's due as a character. And so I'm excited to see what happens to him in the MCU. So I'm going to give this 4 out of 5 stars, which, I mean, I've seen the movie twice, but I'm also excited to see it again. It's an I don't own every MCU movie, physically at home, but I'll own this movie because it's really good and I'm going to enjoy watching it. And part of that has to do with the way that both of you said it pays nostalgia correctly. It plays that card correctly. And I love it. I really did. I really love this. So as we close out, Amanda, let everybody know where can they find you if they'd like to catch up with you and talk more Spider-Man or see what else you've got going on.
Oh, absolutely. I am on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok under @TwinSonsAmanda. So super easy to find, one handle for all three.
And Aaron, where could everybody find you?
I'm also on the social medias, although I don't use them as often as I used to, but I'm on Twitter every once in a while. That's probably the one I still use the most. That's more about geeky stuff. So @AVGoins, AVGOINS. And also plug my podcast, Bad Wolf Radio, which is a Doctor Who podcast that I do with my good friend Adam Farmer. And we just wrapped up the season 13 Flux series, those 6 episodes. So we have episodes out around all of those. And we'll be covering the New Year's special when it comes out at the beginning of the year.
Which, I gotta admit, I've seen episode 1 of the Flux series. I need to finish the rest. So I'm thankful we're moving in a new direction with Doctor Who. But the first episode of Flux was actually pretty decent. So I'm interested to see where it goes. And you should check out Aaron's podcast on Doctor Who because it's fantastic. So been a long time listener, first time caller. But yeah, check it out. You can find me all over the place on social media, MattRushing02, on Instagram, Twitter, Letterboxd, Vero, all of those places. Of course, I'm here on the network doing a few shows. You can find me inside the 602 Club feed doing Snyder Cuts as well as Assembling Avengers. And then I'm also doing The Orb, Literary Treks, and Warp 5. The Orb's about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Literary Treks is about the books and the comics of Star Trek. And Warp 5 is about Star Trek Enterprise. And then over on the Nerd Party Network, John Mills and I are talking about Star Wars each and every week, which is a total blast. In fact, we have a really special episode that's coming out the same week this episode is. We will have dropped an archive episode with our good friend Nick Anastasio, who worked on the Clone Wars, talking about the final season. So that's really fun. And you can also find me over there doing a Finnish show called Owl Post. I did that with Drake Kaufman, and we talked about every single chapter of the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time. But thank you so much for joining us. And y'all come back now, you hear?